generation funeral professional.
Oh, recording. There's the recording. Now let's start it. Hey, everybody.
Hi. Hi, we're identical twins. That's Dr. Nick on your right of your screen, on left of me. And I am Benny Capaul. I'm a fourth generation funeral professional out of a small town, Norman Rockwell kind of feel community. Doc Nick.
Okay, so if I'm going to share the screen with everybody, how do I just hit share screen, right?
Yes, because I made you a co-host, I believe. So you are able to share your screen.
Okay, I'm seeing what I could do here. I don't know. Can you guys see that?
Not yet.
What I did. Okay, hold on. I'm figuring it out, guys. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It will desktop, right?
Okay, so you go to share screen on the green button part. You press that, and then you should see where you can share your desktop. Okay, so share screen is on the bottom. That's the bottom function.
Only host. Wait, all participants or only host?
All participants. I already shared so that you can share your screen. I shared it for all participants can do it. Yeah.
All right. Do the privacy thing.
Oh, there's a privacy issue, guys. I'm so sorry.
Go to system preference.
That's on your end.
You know, it's not my fault, guys. I promise you. I didn't.
He's only a doctor.
You know, it's not my fault. I promise you. All right, where is it at? Where would it be at? General? Require.
Hit that screen share again. It tells you where to go.
Okay, hold on. Oh, we're figuring this out. We're gonna figure this out. We're all in this together.
We're all in this together.
We are, and you guys are very similar to my daughters. You're like the most identical. You know, they have like 4 types of identical twins, by the way. Did you guys?
Yes. Yeah. There's mirror twins, which Dr. Nick and I are not. There's identical, and then, you know, I don't know how much we know we're identical. We know that, but you know, I know now that they found that even in some of the same sac births, there's a lining that separates the twins.
You know what? Listen. It's not working. It's all good. We're just gonna go with it.
You have help from a very intelligent lawyer in the chat. She apparently does this all the time.
There's a chat, Nick. Look at the chat.
Oh, there's a chat?
Go to the chat. Go to system preferences.
Okay, hold on. System preferences. Privacy. Where's privacy? I'm an Apple user, guys. Security and privacy.
He's a doctor. He's just got
I'm trying to figure
credentials.
And there it says to add
privacy. It's privacy.
Recording.
So you go to recording, Nick. I've seen it.
Where's it at?
Can you go down here? Let's see, there's.
You have the lawyer assisting the doctor.
Lawyer, thank you so much. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm in my security and privacy. I'm looking at maybe camera. Is it camera? No, wouldn't be that.
You got Zoom sounds.
Pallavi, if you come off mic and assist. She's brilliant.
Okay. I'm probably doing something silly here.
No, even when you share screen, does it directly take you to system preferences?
Yes, and then I got into security and privacy. Now what? And I got to privacy.
There, it will tell you if you could add Zoom to your screen recording.
I see it. I think I figured it out. Hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry, guys. So sorry, everybody that's listening. Okay, the app below is able to access your camera. Cool. Okay. Where would be like your screen stuff? Because if not, it's no big deal. We could talk this through. I'm not worried about it. It's really. You know, it's really not a big deal. I just would like to share it with everybody, but it's okay. It's not a big deal.
All right. I also have it if you don't have it.
Yeah. Well, no, don't worry about it because I did some. Don't worry about it. We're good. We're just gonna go off what we got. Okay. Listen, we're fun. You're not. There's no worries at all. Everybody will understand what we're talking about. Okay. Here we go. Well, again, thank you. everybody for being out here and listening to these two numbskulls talk about what we're going to talk about. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology. I specialize in grief and loss. This is my identical twin brother. He is a funeral professional, and who people don't know what that means. It means a funeral director, but he also is an embalmer and a funeral director. So it's a profession, and it's important that we give him that respect, right?
Thank you.
Okay, so with that being said, everybody, let's go into where do we come from, Ben? Tell everybody where we come from.
So we're from a very small town of Ida, Michigan. There's probably 2,000 to 3,000 people in our actual town. Very Norman Rockwell type approach. We come from I'm the fourth generation funeral director. Our father was a funeral director. His father was a funeral director, and his father was a funeral director. That started the business back 85 years ago that we've been in this small town. Because of that, we grew up and around death. I mean, we literally have seen death from a very young age. We played like Nerf guns in the casket room when we were super young, got in trouble. We would, if you've ever seen My Girl, there's a scene where she drops her basketball into the embalming room. Doc, Nick, and I were kids, and we had to call Dad in for dinner, and we'd open the embalming door and say, Dad, dinner's ready, not even thinking anything of it. So it was a very interesting lifestyle, especially when we got older and realized that, wow, 90% of people are afraid of death in general, and they won't even talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we got into our podcast of Let's Talk About Death.
Well, and I also think that, it's in our blood, like you would say genetics, like genetically you have blue eyes or whatever. But for us, I would say that genetically we deal with grief and loss. Absolutely. I think that's really a part of our family and a part of who we are. Now, the whole presentation was set up around this idea of traumatic grief. What does that look like? How does that happen? What can we do, right? So like traumatic grief, right? It usually involves an unexpected death. Either it's horrific or it's violent. So it's maybe it's a suicide, maybe it's a homicide or something like that. These kind of situations, or like COVID, right? COVID's going on right now. We got 45-year-olds dying with no preconditions, right? Yeah. They're just dying.
We have kids dying.
Yeah, and kids too. So the problem is in the clinical world as a psychologist, what does that bring about, right? So if we look at grief in general, we can say that that's kind of a human experience. We all are going to lose something in our lives, whether that's Goldie the fish, right?
Turtle.
Popo the dog, right? Or maybe it's grandma, mom, dad, whatever. Whatever it is, we don't know. The thing is that I think that's the crazy part about death is that we don't know when our time is. We don't know when it's going to happen. Now, when something like traumatic death happens, we're talking about symptoms of like major depression disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, complex bereavement disorder, and of course, post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you see someone die from a gunshot wound, or maybe you see maybe it's a domestic violence situation or something like that, it can bring in a like depression, anxiety, like symptomology of what we would call like major depression or generalized anxiety. But it also brings out physical problems, right? And this is the thing that I think gets lost. It also brings out like high blood pressure and cancer and cardiac events and ulcerative colitis and like even suicidality themselves, right? You deal with this crazy amounts of anxiety, this crazy amounts of depression. And if you don't get it addressed and you don't talk about it, then you're going to feel isolated, alone, and hopeless, right? And that's like the three biggest things we worry about as clinicians is that if you're not talking about stuff, that gets buried. And I always kind of like put it as like a tea kettle, right? You put enough pressure in a tea kettle, what happens, right? It goes, woo, right?
She's going to whistle.
She's going to whistle, right? Go. And that's when bad things happen. So again, this is stuff that I just want to let everybody aware of. Like, it's not abnormal for someone who's going through some traumatic loss to have major depression or generalized anxiety or PTSD, depending on the situation that happened.
Well, Dr. Nick, if I can go on a little bit further
Yeah,
there
go ahead.
too, the whole traumatic grief, bereavement too, you're not dealing with and I say this with special quotes here, the normal 80, 90-year-old has run the good run, had a great life. Grief is still somebody at 90-year-old, and it still could feel like it was a traumatic loss. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, to us as human beings, we're not taught about death to begin with. So now you're adding an extra piece to the puzzle, and that is this unanswered. We don't have the answer. We don't know. We don't have an answer for why a newborn is dead. We don't have an answer for why there was a huge 70-car pileup on the highway. We don't have answers for that. So the grief process already kind of gets delayed because there's more of this shock that happens. And in my profession, when I'm dealing with families that are dealing with traumatic death, it's almost like they're even more so in this surreal life that, okay, like this happened, but it really didn't happen yet. And a lot of them will come back later, 6 months down the line, and say, I really didn't even get to experience grief till way after, the funeral and everything was kind of done, just because this extra piece of the trauma death.
Well, I think even normal, if we're going to call it normal, and I put that in quotations, right, for everybody in there. But if we're talking about a 98-year-old who, they always put on the death certificate, heart failure, whatever,
cardiac arrest.
And, even with that, like if you were super close to that person, it's still going to hurt.
Oh,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think if we put in this traumatic event, like a car accident or something that we're not prepared for, I'm going to actually put this in quotes. I don't think us human beings are really prepared for death in general.
No.
I think that's an anxiety that we struggle with on a day-to-day basis, whether it is conscious or unconscious. But I do think that the more that we can talk about it, the more that we can address it, the more that we can basically kind of go through the steps with other people, I think the better prepared we are for it when it happens. It's not going to make the death hurt less. What it's going to do is going to give you that starting of, it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's okay to call my friend and say, hey, listen, I'm really struggling today. Or, hey, I really want to tell someone about this story about dad. Like, I don't want that to be forgotten, right? We talk about legacies and how important that is for a lot of people. And absolutely it is. And it means a lot, right? It's that whole meaning making process. But let's pause for a second. Let's continue. I want to get through what I got, and then we're going to leave it open for a lot of people. So how do we deal with this, right? So task of mourning, right? I think the first big thing is to accept it, right? Death happened. Right. And what I mean by acceptance, accepted, I'm not talking about acceptance, which is a Kubler-Ross's stage of grief, where it's like, okay, I accept that this person has moved on, went to the afterlife, blah, blah. I'm saying that I think the first big thing that we got to do is be able to accept the reality that this person died.
Yeah, and if I can go any further, you brought up Kubler-Ross, and her first step is denial, right? You are denying that death has occurred.
Absolutely.
And I agree with you. I think the first process is, Dad is dead. Mm-hmm. My son is dead. My wife of 50 years, she's dead. She's not here anymore.
Yeah. Now what? Right? Now what? And I think that goes into the next part of it is this idea to process the pain of the grief, to accept that the death happened, but then also to understand that we are going to hurt. My father always said when we were growing up, the more that you love someone, the more you are going to be hurt. That is just part of the process. So it's not only acceptance, but it's also giving empathy towards yourself, and that I am going to be in pain. I am going to be suffering, and I might even have some depression, which could lead to clinical depression, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The more you love someone, the more that it hurts when you lose them.
So then we move on to this idea of adjusting to the new world without this person. And that's tough. That's tough because for a lot of people, if we talk about widows and widowers who have been happily married for 50 plus years, and been able to you go to every wedding and be proud of that. And all that stuff. And the minute that, the spouse loses their loved one, it's a shock, right? It's now what, right? Now what, right? And that's where the end comes in, this idea of finding this enduring connection with the person that died, but also embarking into this new life without this person. So, and I put this to the existential idea of meaning making, the logotherapist, right? We talk about this idea of how important it is to make meaning in our small, futile lives, right? And to be honest with you, it's hard, especially for widows and widowers, in my experience, because one of their biggest meanings was taking care of their spouse. Now the spouse is gone. Now what? What do I do? Who am I? I'm not a wife any longer, right? These are great questions that you need to discuss and talk about instead of just burying, right? So that's that. Let's move on. We're going to move on to this idea of, so what can help with our grief, Ben? What can help with our grief?
Well, we can, obviously, the best thing that I can say, and there's the reason going back to my profession, so I have a little bias here. Grief is meant to be community style. It is meant to be discussed because we all share that we don't have a full understanding of death. That is something that none of us are ready for. Doc Nick and I, like I said, have been literally born into death. But the second we lost our grandfather, it was a relearning tool. We got to watch him take his last couple breaths. And to be honest, if it wasn't for my family, if it wasn't for the visitation and the funeral and hearing all the stories and being able to communicate my own grief process, I don't think I'd be able to really get through it. So I would definitely say like supportive relationships, or having a community that is willing to talk about your grief, your experience, right? Because that's the other thing too. We as humans want to bring up our experience, right? I understand how you feel. No, you really don't understand how.
Well, we're going to get into that. How to talk to people.
Got it.
How to talk to people.
Skip it ahead.
So I think an important part here is that I think that unfortunately we live in a society, at least in our experience of where we live in Michigan, and in our little bubble of existence, we notice that we've kind of changed into an individualized society. And unfortunately, when we talk about grief and loss, it's so important to have like almost a community based. So what's one of the things that can help with our grief is having supportive relationships, having people who will listen without judgment, or their own anxieties of death, right? And I think when I say this, I really always go back to that idea of like God gave us 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth for a reason. I think sometimes we forget that.
Absolutely.
Another thing that we can really do to help you with grief is softening your muscle tension, right? It's the connection of mind and body, right? We carry around anxiety, whether we want to admit it or not, whether that is tension in our shoulders, or some people clench their jaws. Some people will munch on their teeth at night, and then they grind it. That's what I meant, not munch. Sorry.
Munching and bunching.
So, another way we could do this is maybe telling stories, right? Telling what this person meant to me and how much we love them, and, leaving a legacy for our kids. And then the last I would say is this idea of post-traumatic growth, which is changing the negative feeling of loss into a new positive change. So maybe maybe the death actually brought something good. Maybe I'm able to be, maybe I lost someone to suicide and now I'm going and speaking about it. That could be super, super beneficial in the grieving process because we made a new meaning out of it.
Absolutely. Or start a community group.
Right.
I lost my son to suicide. I'm going to start a community group for suicide, suicide survivors, or suicide parents of suicidal children. These are all things that they get you out in the community. So you're already doing one of the steps we talked about, Doc Nick.
Yep.
And then you're also giving something to that experience. And by going out there and doing something like that, you're telling their story. So right. you're kind of mapping all 4 out. Not to mention, as you know, therapy itself is a stress reliever. So you're kind of nailing all four.
But I think what's really hard is that I think a lot of people still have a stigma attached to therapy too, just like death, right? It's a, you know, especially for men. We grew up in a very traditional, very conservative, small town where it's like, no, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps because that's what men do. Blah 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 blah.
We don't cry. Boys don't cry. Right? Boys
But
don't
I
cry.
think it's important that men, to me, to be super vulnerable, to cry in public, to show emotions, that to me is strength.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and like Dad has passed down to Doc Nick and I think about this experience. Every year around February, there's this huge game that everybody puts on their TV and roots for one of the two teams, right? You got the Super Bowl.
Or the World Series.
Sure. And what happens at the end between those two teams, whether they win or lose at the end of that game? They're crying.
Yeah.
They're sobbing. They're on the floor. They're sobbing. They're weeping. And fathers are saying to their sons, these are men, right? These are athletes. These are what we consider
what we look up to as kids, right? It's role models,
and they're
right?
and they're crying, and that's okay. But to go up in a funeral and say, I'm sorry, I'm crying, I'm breaking down because I can't get through this eulogy, or I don't want you to see my tears. That's what are we saying about death? What are we saying about life?
Yeah.
You know, it's such an we always said in crying, if I can bring up the crying.
Yeah, go ahead.
Crying, what my dad always said this, and I think this is a beautiful way of describing crying to people. When you had a long day and you're out and you're whether you're in the garden or you're tearing up the ground or you're dragging
or you're playing football, you know, you brought up the Super Bowl
to seed. The first thing you want to do when you get inside is take a shower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how much better you feel after that shower or bath, wherever. I don't want to exclude bathers out there, but you feel so much better, right?
Right.
And the idea is that crying is a shower for the soul. And there's the reason why our bodies cry. There is a reason. They are getting rid of toxins. And these emotions, these deep emotions that we have, the anger, everything gets kind of pushed in there and we weep it out, right?
Yeah.
So if we're holding that in back, not only is it bad for our mental side, it's also bad for our holistic, spiritual side.
Well, in their physical side, right? Again, I talk about muscle tension and I talk about physical issues like heart issues that because we hold on to this stress and this anxiety and this depression, it just builds up and it turns into things like cancer or things like that.
Yeah.
You know, I truly believe that, you know, when we talk about psychology, it's not just about the mind, it's about the mind-body connection. And that's why it's so important to exercise and eat healthy and stuff, because we want to keep our brains healthy, right? Not to mention exercise is a great way to get endorphins, which is the natural, instead of going out and drinking, you know, a pint of alcohol or whatever you're doing.
Self-medicating.
It's self-medicating, right? Yeah. So let's move on a little bit here, because I do want to give some time for our viewers out there to ask questions if they have some. So one thing that Benny and I have come across in our experience is this idea of how to speak to people that are grieving, right? We can talk about traumatic grief, or we can just talk about regular grief, the do's and don'ts, right? If you will, right?
You are correct, Dr. Nick.
So let's start with the don'ts, right? This is things that I think a lot of people that are talking to people who are grieving, I don't think really think about, and then they don't understand that words can actually make the grieving process worse. It can, in a way, make these people very angry. So first thing I always say is don't ever start out something you're talking to someone with grieving with like at least or just, meaning, oh, just get over it, or at least they're in a better place, right? These are things that you don't want to say.
It's been 6 months. Why can't you move on?
That's it, right? Yep. Another thing that you don't want to say is everything happens for a reason. Well, whether you believe that or not, the problem is this person
who may or may not be religious and they just lost their unborn child, there is no reasoning for that. Right.
So when we say this, you know, it can be very hurtful to the person. So just be aware of what we're saying. Another maybe example would be like, you know, someday you'll move on, right? Well, no, I've always been a firm believer that with grief and loss, it's not something that you get over. It's something that you move with. It's something that will always be a part of you. And that's okay. That's again, it's accepting that death occurred and then taking it with you. How am I going to be stronger? How would this person want me to be stronger? Right. Do you got any other examples?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna bring it up, and I want to say this to everybody who's listening, because everybody's thinking right now, well, I've said that at chapel.
It's okay.
First of all,
it's okay.
We've all done it.
Yeah.
It's almost like second nature when you walk into a visitation that you're going to make one of these pre-thought, like I park cars. That's a part of my job as a funeral director. I park cars for the cordage or the going to the cemetery, and wife comes, puts down her window. I just met with her. I know that she lost her husband that she loved, and that was her life. And I asked, "How are you doing today?"
Well, actually, I'm going to stop you right there.
Oh, you are.
How are you doing? Is to me an inappropriate statement. But if you make the comment like you just said, which I'm glad, because you learned from me. I told you this. How are you doing today? Makes it more personal. Makes it obviously they're going through a really hard time, but it's now asking them, how are they doing right now? So if you make it very personal, that's a good thing. And
then be ready for them to actually answer. That's the other thing, right? We're not used to them actually being honest and open. And I find it very interesting and very educational for me when I was younger in the profession, when they'd actually say, and excuse my French here, but this is what I literally got back from a surviving spouse, was it's been a pretty shitty day.
Yeah.
I had a horrible week. I haven't gotten any sleep. And you're sitting there and you're a foot away because you're by their car window, and you're like, okay, now what do I do now, right? Because that's the idea. And what I found, to be honest, sometimes not saying anything is the right answer.
Right.
And sometimes saying, I have no words.
Right.
Can you describe what you're going through right now?
Right.
Because that's what they want, right? That's what a grieving person wants, is support and wants to be heard. Now they may say, I'm not ready to talk about it, and you just got to
Right.
deal with that too. And I want to put this out here. Dr. Nick and I use humor because we're trying to relieve some of the tension in the room, because we do know what we're talking about with death, and we realize that it's a very stuffy situation. We want to make it relatable. So we do not mean to offend anybody if death is a heavy and hot topic to anybody, but just so you know, we do use humor.
And as a psychologist, I would confront the idea, if this is triggering to you, this may be something that you do want to talk about, maybe something you do want to explore, and maybe there is some grief and loss that you haven't approached yet. And that's okay. I think we all do, right? And I think that every time we lose another being, whether it's an animal, pet, a house, if we're moving or whatever, the idea is that all that stuff that we haven't approached yet is going to come back to the forefront. So again, it is okay to be human. It is okay to be faulty. That's what we are. We're human beings.
Absolutely. And Dr. Nick, so we talked about don'ts. What would be some do's or maybe things to think about when you
I think you mentioned a couple of them, right? It's this idea of just being with the person. Maybe it's not actually saying anything at all. It's just sitting with them. Maybe a hug is more appropriate than saying, sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for this one, right? Sorry for your loss, I feel like is the need reaction, meaning like you go into a store, you go into a hardware store, right? You're looking around, and the gentleman comes with the vest and he's like, can I help you? And you're like, no, I'm just looking, right? It's not that we're actually thinking about that, because technically we're probably all looking around the house like, where the heck is the tape? Where's the tape? Right? But instead of just saying, yeah, you're right, I do need help, like we do this knee-jerk reaction where it's like, no, we don't need any help, we're okay, and it's like, I think that's the knee-jerk reaction with loss, is that we come to the funeral home and we say things like, sorry for your loss, right? And again, don't get me wrong, like absolutely we're sorry for their loss. We don't want anybody to be in pain if we love them. But be more personal, like maybe hold their hand, maybe give them a hug. I know we're in COVID times, but sometimes it's more important just for that person to know that you're there, that you're actually listening to them.
And I'll throw out another caveat to this too. Look at them straight in the eyes.
Mhm.
That's another big thing that we do as humans, is when we feel awkward, we lose focus, we lose contact, right? They want to be seen. They want to be seen. And even if they start crying, they start losing it, maybe they start wailing, realize by you looking at them, you're giving them permission to do that.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge gift that you can give, because what you're going to find out, what Dr. Nick and I found out, nobody's educated on death. We have sex education in schools at a very young age. There is nothing on death education. What's sad is not everybody's going to have sex out there. Yes, most of us do, and it could be quite
a good or a bad experience.
I
right?
wish we had the credentials to talk about sex.
Right.
It'd be a lot better. But you are going to die, and you're going to deal with grief one way or another. And what people don't realize is the same skills that you use for grieving a human being, you also use on grief of losing a job, grief on divorce, grief on moving to a new location. These are all problem-solving skills that help people get through life in general. And we just found this out through grief, just like Kubler-Ross found out all of the stages of death and dying in hospice, ended up correlating to people now surviving and dealing with grief.
So let's go a little deeper, Ben. Let's move on a bit deeper.
Let's do that.
How do we talk to children? Right. I think this is such an important topic, because not only are we don't like to go there. How dare you bring that into this room? But when grief happens, when a death happens, we don't do a good job of dealing with children, right? Whether educating them, understanding, or even bringing them. There's a lot of families that will say, I just don't think they're ready for this. Let me go back to what I said about individualized by a community-based culture. One of the biggest things that I have seen is that if you go back in time, 60 years ago, having your grandfather or grandmother, that was wasn't home, the children were always around it.
Dr. Capaul, Dr. Nick, we're getting a little bit of the clubhouse matrix going on. I'm not sure why.
Experience death in all of its glory, because honestly, this is something too. Death is beautiful, and I have no problem saying this. Death is extremely beautiful. We decide as humans that it's not. What Dr. Nick and I tried to do, and I'm not trying to put words in you, but I think you would agree with this, is if we can add beauty into everybody's life through something we say or do to death, it will help them get through their grieving process better. It's not going to get them through it, because it's not a complete course. You don't become a doctor in completing grief, because it never happens. Grief is a scar. It stays with you forever. It's how you treat it and how you let it heal is how smoother the transition is for that grief.
The process, yeah.
But yeah, going back to children is so important. And so many parents are like, well, we're going to tell our kids that grandma and grandpa's sleeping. Don't do this, please. Dr. Nick and I are putting our credentials online here. Do not tell your children grandpa or grandma is sleeping. That is not correct. Those kids will go to sleep and be like, am I going to wake up?
Am I going to wake up? Right.
Or the opposite, 2 years later, when they realize that you lied to them, you blatantly lied to them. Now they never got the chance to say goodbye if they wanted to. Now children have their own different ways. Another big thing that's so different in today's is grandparents are raising a lot of these kids.
Yep.
Right? So grandkids, or the kids that are in the visitation funerals, are more of the kids to these grandparents than they are sometimes to their own parents.
Right.
And they have a different relationship. Kids have a different relationship with the grandparents, because grandparents usually spoil the hell out of them, have all the fun with them. And then when they get too much, they send them back to mom and dad. Right. So they are always the fun parental view. So little things. And Dr. Nick and I talk about this in our podcast, and we talk about this. If anybody has more questions, feel free to reach out to us. But the big things are like why we use a casket. What happens to because kids are concrete, right? So you tell them grandma's going to be cremated. Okay. That's a scary thought for a 5-6-year-old, because they don't understand. They don't get that. You tell them they're going to be cremated. They're like, okay, whatever that means. I'm going to go play my whatever. And then the next week they see this urn, right? That's very confusing. Grandpa was a big, stocky man. He loved to throw the football at me. And now he's in a box. Like, how does that even work? And what we've learned with everybody, and everybody can agree with this, your imagination is always worse than what actually it is.
Yeah.
So we described something like, okay, kids, you go to a bonfire, right? And you stack all these twigs up, and it's a huge, right? It's huge. And then you light it on fire, and what happens? It becomes ashes. And how much smaller is those ashes from the fire? It's doing two things. It's showing them what that process is in a way that's a happy environment.
Mm-hmm.
Usually bonfires are a good environment for kids. They have fun. There's campfire songs, s'mores. They got the pizza things. They're doing everything out there, telling scary stories. That's all good. So we're bringing in a positive experience for them to explain what cremation is. If you don't, they're going to wonder, and they're going to make up their own things. Another one is a casket. We always kind of present a casket as, excuse me, when Christmas or your birthday or Hanukkah or whatever you celebrate, or however you celebrate it, comes up, what do you get your presents in? They say a box, and then you say, okay, that's why grandma's in a box or grandpa's in a box. They're a present to us. We are protecting them. And we kind of go on to, I always tell a silly story to all the girls, or in today's society, boys, when they get older, and someday, if they're lucky enough, somebody's going to get down on one knee and they're going to have a little box. And if they don't have that little box, you say no, and everybody gets a chuckle out of it. What I find with teaching children about death, when you look up at those adults, they're so happy because you are doing something that they didn't know how to tell their children.
Right.
So you're actually teaching them by teaching. And what we can do is, if we teach children how to properly grieve and deal with death, they will pass that on, and we can fight and break this stigma and taboo on being so afraid of death.
So let's summarize. So what do we do, right? When we talk to children, we tell the truth, right? And we tell that in age appropriate. Like Benny said earlier, like, be concrete. If your child asks, why is grandpa cold when I touch him, right? If he's being viewed, you explain to him, like, for example, if you left a drink out in temperature rise, right? It gets cold, right? It becomes room temperature. If the room is set for 78, the body will be 78. It'd be cold to the touch, right? Versus when you touch a normal person like Benny here, right? He's going to feel 98.6 degrees, right? That's warm. Another thing you could do is be prepared for a variety of emotional responses, meaning every kid is different. Every kid one kid might ask you 1,000 questions. Another kid might say, no, I'm good. I get it. It makes sense. I'm good. Make sure to use the word dead. This is so important. And the reason why I think it's so important is because when we use things like, loss, or went to their final resting, passed away, things like that, we're not allowing children to understand what dead means. And
dead
I think
is a concrete word.
Yes,
it's a finality, right? Death, die, dead, right? They're finality words. I understand the fluff to it, right?
Right.
That's what we're doing. We're fluffing.
We're protecting them. We think we're protecting them.
But yeah, concrete. This is some of them, their first experience with death. So if you already give them the instruments that they'll need to accomplish it, now they might not get it, but at least you can say, as a professional father, et cetera, you did the best you could in that situation, knowing that. Here's a perfect example of a concrete kid question. Little kid tugged on my dad's upper suit jacket one time, and dad, of course, went down to him, because that's another thing. When you talk to kids, go down to their level. If you can get down on one knee, do it, because it means the world to them, because you are on the same page as them. But he tugged dad. Dad got down on one knee, and he looked around the room, make sure his parents were around. He said, "What do you do with all the legs?" Because all the kids see are these caskets, right? And usually the legs are tucked under the other side of the casket, the half of the casket. And this kid was under the impression that funeral directors take legs and they reuse them. Who knows what he was thinking? But that's how concrete children are.
So open up the casket and show them,
Yes.
like, that grandma's legs are are still there. Now, with that being said, we got to move on a little bit. I want to get some time here.
Sorry,
So,
Doc.
Yeah, you're okay. Cry with your children. It's important to allow them to understand it's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. It's what's not okay is the behaviors that follow anger, right? Just being angry is a human experience, but to go and punch a hole in the wall and that kind of stuff, that might not be appropriate. That's what you explained to them. Allow your child to participate in the funeral ritual, whether that is cremation or whether that is burial. Like, as much as you can get them involved, maybe they do the eulogy, maybe they make a card for grandpa to go with them. Let your child grieve in their way, whatever way that is. And then the other ideas is, like, prepare your child for life without them. We got Christmas, we got all these holidays coming up, Thanksgiving and Christmas, or whatever holidays Hanukkah, whatever holidays you celebrate. That's going to be the toughest time, right? Because these kids are used to, grandpa was always the one that cut the turkey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Grandma was the one that always did the
cheese
balls.
Late
night prayer, the cheese balls. So again, I think that's important. What don't you do? So here's the thing. Don't hide your grief from your child. Allow them to be present for it. Allow them to ask questions. Allow them to share memories of the loved one with them. Don't change the this is a big one. Don't change the subject when your child brings up the loss. I know this is really hard, but as an adult, we should be the ones that are able to hold the space for the children. If they want to ask questions, we can talk about it.
And be honest, if it's tough, say, you know what, Sammy, I'm having a hard time too. I miss grandpa. I miss my dad. They understand that, they get that. And what I learned in mortuary science, what I thought was very interesting, is kids will allow parents to grieve first before they go into their grieving process a lot of the time, which is you think is backwards, because we as parents try to protect our children the best we can. The problem is, in this case, mommy is sad.
Right.
I want mommy to get better before I can start processing my own thoughts.
Right. Children are protective, right?
Absolutely. One more thing we didn't mention. This is very important. I found this out through another psychologist I was reading a podcast to, and that was, when you go to a visitation or a funeral, explain what these kids are going to see.
Yeah.
Before they go into it. Because that's another thing too. They get bombarded into this room where people are crying and talking, and they don't really understand what's really going on until the end of it. If you explain to them, you're going to see grandpa in a casket, you're going to walk up to people, they're going to tell you stories. Some people might cry. You might want to cry. That's okay. You might not want to cry. That's okay. You can kind of set the stage for it.
And the last two that I do want to cover is don't ban laughter when we're talking about death. I think that's super important as a human experience. And that's not just for children, that's adults as well. And then the last time is, don't put a limit on your child's grief, just like you wouldn't put a limit on your own. It may take someone 6 months, it may take someone the rest of their life, right? And that's okay, that's acceptable. And with that being said, Ben alluded to this earlier, we do have a podcast called Let's Talk About Death. You can find that on every major platform that you listen to podcasts. Please check it out. Let us know if you've got any questions or concerns. And then lastly, we're going to leave it open to any questions that either the viewers or anybody else in the listening would like to ask.
Okay. Awesome. So you have an invitation, anybody who's in the room. I'm going to check on Clubhouse. People have been coming in and out of our room on Clubhouse, and I'm going to check the live on Facebook as well and let you know if there are any questions there.
Okay, awesome. Oh, you got a question. I think someone's waving their hand.
Tiffany.
It's me. I just kind of have I guess it's more of a statement and agreement, because I'm literally I guess you would say, the processes of grief. My mother died earlier this month.
Oh, okay.
Tiffany, your mom's name?
Gloria.
I'm so sorry for Gloria's death. I'm thinking about you. That's all.
Thank you. It's interesting because my family's grief process is really confusing to a lot of people. Because for us, there's a lot of laughter. it's not nervous laughter, but we, even at her memorial and her death, we chose to remember all the good things. Like we actually had people speak up of the funny lessons they had learned. And so I know for me, it gave me a settlement and ease that people were able to talk about the happy and the good versus one thing for me in grieving, I hate for people to come to me and talk sad. Like it really bothers me. I also understand that people process loss differently. So even before my own loss, agreeing with what you said, a lot of times I'll just approach a person and say, I have no words that could, could compensate your loss, but just know I'm here for you. I'm praying for you. I'm thinking for you, thinking of you. And I'm here, if you need me. Now, I also understand that a lot of people don't reach out when they're in a grief process. So then I periodically will check back. Hey, what's going on? Where you at?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to cut you off just for a second because I think that is a great point. If you really want to help someone who's grieving, come back in 6 months or a year and check back with them. Because that's when it becomes long. When the casserole stop coming and all the cards stop coming, this person is left again alone with their grief.
And for some, that's honestly when their grief starts.
Yeah,
is because they're so distracted by all the monetary things they got to take care of, and the kids are still in town, and the casseroles are coming, the neighbors are still stopping in, and then all of a sudden everybody goes away, right? Life has to go on. It's just how it is. So if you really want to do something special, like Doc Nick is saying, is remember that their next anniversary or their next birthday or the next holiday, and
I have a couple clients and friends who I've gone through loss with. They're going through loss. So for me, I'm cognizant of the time that's close to an anniversary of their loss. And then I'll check on them like close to the anniversary. But also sometimes I just listen, like they'll tell me what is coming up. Like I'm missing this today. I'm missing seeing my mom's face, or, doing this with my dad. And then also to the other point of talking with children, because of course my mother, going back to my own loss, my mother had grandchildren. So I think we did a really good job of talking to them, but also including them in the process. Because my mom had a long-term sickness. So they were there for the sickness and the steps and understanding death. And the cutest, but the funniest story is I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. My daughter told her, well, grandma died. And she said, grandma died? And she's like, yes. And well, we just need to charge her. So
concrete.
That's it, right?
Concrete.
That's it.
So
shock paddle.
New generation with, the way their concepts. Like
absolutely.
She dies, we just need to charge her. So, I think that if people, sometimes people are afraid to laugh. They think that if they laugh, that they're having that they're being disrespectful, they're a hard time. But my understanding is it's okay to laugh. Like just laugh and remember the good times and change the perspective from the loss, if you can, to what you gained, what you had with them in your life. So but I thank you guys for such wonderful tips.
Absolutely. And Tiffany, I'm say the way your family, if everybody experienced grief that way, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. Absolutely.
But the thing is, the sad part is most families don't experience grief like you and your family did.
And I think even deeper than that, we just don't talk about it. Nope. We're just not prepared for it. So when it happens, we're like, we just ran into a brick wall. Right. And then
before I go, like you are so right. When I tell you, talking about it, being able to talk with my mom before she actually passed away. I know, like my mother actually joked about what was happening. She's like, well, I don't want to go, but if I gotta go, this is the way I'm gonna do it.
In style.
Everything prepared. And we talked about it. Like it literally, I was telling somebody, and I was there for my mom's last breath.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful experience.
And
terrible and hard to take in, but such a beautiful experience.
You know what it was when I saw it? The thing that hit me was it's the exact same breath that babies take when they come into the world.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I was looking at my mom and I said, wow, I'm here for your last breath, just like you were here for my first.
Right.
My experience. But I think I even told Laurel, more people should experience going through death, not just showing up after the fact, but like literally going through to the end of death. I think if they did that, they would have more respect for life. They don't have
Absolutely. Absolutely.
to have
Well,
to-
and you know, we always make the comment, and it's true. It's like we were born to die, right? That's just that's the reality. I know that's tough to hear. I know that's tough to understand, but I think as you're able to talk about this and address it, I think it becomes more real. That we don't have a lot of time in this world, so let's make the best out of it.
I think we got another question here before we lose.
There is a
lose
question.
time.
I apologize.
Nope, you're good. You're good. That's why I'm here. That's why
Oh,
you got me here.
I didn't get any.
There was a hand. There was a hand up. I think it was.
Oh,
Sarah,
hand
right?
up. Oh, okay, go ahead. Absolutely. Yeah.
When death is unexpected, and then you have toxic family members making that worse. How do you come out on the other side? Because especially if it lasts long, if it's continuing, if it doesn't seem as if there's a let up in terms of the other person's behavior, even when you step away.
The best thing I can say is you can do the best you can to educate. You can do the best you can to be honest, open, and be like, share that. I understand that the way that you're grieving is who you are, but do you see that you're possibly missing out on the experience of actually embracing the death? The problem is you can't force somebody to grieve a certain way. That's the biggest problem. And as you find out in today's society, which has went from a very communal society now to an individual, me, anger is huge right now. And especially because we're in a COVID society where we have been forced to do certain things and not be able to do certain things.
Absolutely.
And especially in the States, I can share this, and Dr. Nick can say the same thing. People do not like being told what to do.
No.
So now you're adding, sorry for your loss, you can only have 10 people.
Yeah.
Sorry for your loss, you can't have luncheons. You can't have this. I have had people literally say to me when I said, I'm sorry, you have to wear a mask. It is mandated. Well, I thought you would care more about your families.
Mm-hmm.
They are so in denial about this pandemic that they see it as a negative thing that I'm making people mask up. That is a problem with grief. Grief is blinding to some. And then what they use is their anger because that's the easiest way in their approach to get through the grief. They don't want to get to acceptance. Misery loves company. And they want that pity party because they want people to keep communicating with them. And they're not willing to make that step forward to grieve properly.
Right. Yep.
So Sarah, sometimes there is no answer. Those people might continue the rest of their lives being toxic. The best you can do is educate and go through your grief the way that you need to, because actions speak louder than words too.
Absolutely.
And if you can, and if, for instance, your kids, your family, if they see you going through it, they might say, how did you do it? How did you do it? Yet again, this goes back into communicating, talking about death, talking about the elephant in the room or the grim reaper in the room, and that is death.
Well, and let me say this too, Sarah, to you. Unfortunately, as human beings, I think we struggle with this idea of control and being able to control the situation. And unfortunately, we don't have control. The only thing that we have control over is how we deal with it, how we experience things, how we take things. So what I would actually challenge you to do, and I know this is very difficult, it's one of those a lot easier said than done kind of situations, but don't let them ruin your grief. Don't let them change how you deal with your grief. That's your grief, and that is personal, and that is yours. And they can never take that away from you.
Own it. I know Dr. Nick and I are very, very time understanding. We realize we're kind of 2 minutes already over.
Yep.
So if you need to move on, please do. Like I said, you can catch us on our podcast. You can email one of us at let's talk about deathpod@gmail.com.
Or just show up and come talk to us. You know, We're cool
we
with
love
that
to do
too.
this. We love to do this. And I joke because what if 10 years from now we actually got people to talk about death? Then Doc, Nick, and I wouldn't know what to do with half.
We
our
wouldn't
time.
have a job, you know. That's okay with me.
Thank you so much for giving us the space to do this. Thank you so much for letting us educate, and thank you for just being there.
And as we always end our podcast, we're going to end it on the same note. If you're not talking about death,
You sure ain't living.
thank you all. We appreciate and love you all.
Oh, that's excellent. I love that. If you're not talking about death, you sure aren't living. Okay. So we did have a few questions. So one, of course, I think I can answer. You are based in Michigan, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, because that's what I heard you say. And the other one is, do you have any kind of infographic? Okay, and I'm also getting one from Clubhouse. So from Facebook is, do you have any kind of infographic or podcast in your list or menu of podcasts that they could focus on from the information that you shared today?
Ooh, good one.
Let me see the one on Clubhouse as well. There's another one coming through from Clubhouse.
Yes, I do have one from the National Funeral Directors Association. They have really good ones. Let me get the podcast name though for you. A brush with death.
That's another good podcast. Yeah.
A Brush with Death is a really good one to talk about kind of the things we talk about a little bit. There are a National Funeral Directors Association, so they also talk about a little bit about what they do, but they have some great speakers that talk about some of the things we talked about.
And let me be open and transparent with everybody listening. If you go and look at the Let's Talk About Death podcast, you're going to understand that every episode talks about a specific subject. Like there is one 30-minute just straight on how to talk to children about death.
Grief.
There's one about disenfranchised grief. There's one about existentialism and how that deals, death anxiety. I'm trying to think what else. Pets, death. Like again, you just scroll down them, and you'll see all the episodes we have, and maybe some won't apply to you. Maybe others will. So,
but also, you guys are mentioning it right now. Clubhouse is a huge place.
It's a great thing
that you not only can piggyback on our Let's Talk About Death. What is that? What is that?
Clubhouse.
It's a special club.
That's our club.
And then there's also a lot of members of the death doulas and et cetera, that they have their own rooms. So you can piggyback from our room and go to their rooms. Yeah. They have some really good stuff. And a lot of grievers.
Yeah. Just
going out there and they had a bad experiences or great experience, and they're trying to educate people on how that looks.
Well, and I think one thing that we try to do desperately is we leave our email open. If you have any questions, we try to address them. I think that's the toughest thing is that, Benny and I are coming from our own experience. So of course, maybe some of the things we're talking about doesn't apply to you, and that's great. About it, like again, and I think that's where this whole Let's Talk About Death thing really inspired us, was this idea to have an open forum where it's non-judgmental, it's very open, empathetic, compassionate.
It's a safe tree.
But we're also going to throw in some humor because that's just who we.
We don't do that.
How dare us, right? Yeah, how dare us. All right. So was there another question? I apologize.
Yes, there was one came through from Clubhouse. Essentially, they said that they appreciate what you've shared. They'd like to know whether or not, I guess, in your experience in all the decades of working in the funeral home, have you guys experienced people grieving in more indigenous ways?
Absolutely. I'm going to say this. We're going from a more religious community to a very more spiritual community. How that is shown has been very interesting for me. I think in some ways it's been a little bit of a headache for my father because he's just so used to certain things. And now our community, our generation, I'm not saying everybody, guys, I'm just telling what I'm seeing. Most of us don't go to church anymore. We don't have a church anymore. We have our own spiritual chaplain, or we ourselves are our own communicator to our higher power, whatever that may be. So absolutely, it is changing. It is absolutely changing. The sad part that I see with that, and this is the only thing I'm going to say, and I think spiritual, religious, anything that's going to help you get through your grieving process is amazing. What I do see as a problem is we're getting out of the community based.
Yeah.
We're not having the showings anymore. We're not having, everything is so direct right now. Everything is direct. And yet again, I'm not saying if you did direct or if you are thinking about direct cremation for yourself or burial, it's a bad thing. What I do suggest is make sure you talk to your loved ones that that's what they want as well. Because the idea is when you go, it's them who are dealing with this grief.
Well, and I think that, you know, my father always said it best. A funeral really isn't for the person that died. It's for the survivors, right? It's for everybody to come and deal with this loss, right? The person that's died is gone, right? And don't get me wrong, it's all about legacy and talking about this person and what they meant to you. But more importantly, like, these are your children that you're leaving behind. These are the spouse that you're leaving behind, your family, right? And for some people, they need a place to come and grieve and get a community-based love.
And I'll leave you with this statistic that came out, which I thought was very interesting. It's not right or wrong. Doc Nick and I are not here to judge anybody, but it's just something to think about. People are willing to pay over $12,000 to $15,000 for a party over a funeral. So they're more willing to pay for a party afterwards than they are the actual visitation, funeral, etc. What are we saying about death, grief, and grieving? Now, I understand that it's a celebration of life. I get that 100%. But is it the celebration of life, or is it us trying to yet again brush this death concept under the rug?
Push it away.
Just a thought. It's something to think about. And I thought it was very interesting when I found out that.
Okay. Thank you so much. That looks like all the questions. I didn't see a follow-up question from Facebook or Clubhouse. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for rounding out the discussion, okay? Because with any kind of violence, unfortunately, a byproduct of that is death.
Yep.
So I wanted to ensure that in our holistic discussion of domestic violence and all of the contributors and all of the fallout, that we included a conversation around death. So for all those who are listening here on Zoom, for those who have been with us throughout the day on Clubhouse, for those who are with us on Facebook right now, we just want to let you know we appreciate you being here, Dr. Nicholas Capaul and your brother Benny.
Yes.
Let me tell you, they are really identical. Like my daughters that came out with the same birthmark on their butts.
Ah, that's hilarious.
And I'm sure they love you telling that.
Yes, I bet they do.
So much. But the nurses loved it because they would come into the room showing other nurses and just flipping them over. And they're like, look at this. We've never seen this before.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
Well, I'll tell a story. My mother put nail polish on both Dr. Nick and I's toes, just because we were so identical at the beginning. They were worried they would misname us.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughters look completely different to me, even though nobody can tell them apart.
even as babies.
Yeah, even as baby.
Oh wow.
I was in the hospital for 7 months with them, and they would do the monitoring every single day. So I felt like I got to know them, their personalities, and all their little idiosyncrasies before they even emerged. So they were identical to the personalities they manifested in utero. So I could tell the difference. They had different personalities. Yeah, one was more fussy immediately, and that's just how she was in the womb. She was just like, oh. Okay, let me guess. One more thing.
Yes.
Dr. Nick, are you the firstborn?
I am.
Yes, I knew it. I call it every time, the birth order, every time.
Well, you know what they say about bees, the baby, the beautiful one, really the good looks, I got everything. I cooked a little longer, so I have a little bit more, of the good, the good.
Annoying, boring. Nobody likes them. I mean, we could go on for hours.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. Thank you for that.
Well, we never know how many people are going to see this. It's going to be on YouTube, on Facebook,
Awesome.
TikTok. We're going to be cutting clips and stuff like that, so people know to come look at the full episodes that we have. All right. We really appreciate you being here. This is an international organization. You have no idea. Just ask them, where did you first hear about us? And if they tell you our Championing Over Violence Summit, you know the ripples are happening. All right.
Awesome.
So
We love you. We love you.
Thank you for the
having
hard
us.
work and everything that you're doing.
And
It's very
and
important.
for all of you, like anybody listening still, if you need anything or need help or just want to talk, give us a call. Like we're those guys.
Call us on our pages. No, give us an email. It's easier.
Before we end, why don't we do that? Okay.
Mhm.
Because you're not here with us to drop it into the chat. So just, can you verbally tell us the website? We know the podcast, but the website, a phone number, email.
Yeah. Okay. So it's as easy as this. So the email that we have is letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com. That's letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com. You can also go to our website at letstalkaboutdeathpodcast.com. Or if really you can't find us anywhere else, I'm a Capaul. It's Capaul Funeral Home. We're out of Ida, Michigan. We're the only funeral home in Ida, Michigan.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much again.
We love you all.
Peace
Namaste.
Have an awesome evening. Bye-bye.
Peace, love, and directing. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that concludes our program for today. And I wanted to see how everybody was doing. I like them because they are not too heavy. I had been looking for a BIPOC doctors that discuss this, and I really couldn't find any. So they were the next best thing. Their position wasn't as much a decolonizing, less colonialist approach. However, they did lean in to the end with the questions a little bit more. So how are we doing? Is everybody okay? That was a deep way to end. And for those who are listening on Facebook and on Clubhouse, thank you so much for being here. We're about to close out the room on Clubhouse in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Goodbye, everyone. Okay. And we're about to shut down the live on Facebook. Goodbye, everyone on Facebook. We will see you later. Reach out to us at witsiinstitute@gmail.com. If you need to text or call us, it's 1-561-501-3332. Thank you so much.